Hello everybody and welcome to the online presentation of our paper entitled Studying Personalized Just-in-Time Auditory Briefing Guides and Potential Safety Implications During Simulated Driving. I'm happy to be allowed to present this work on behalf of me and my co-authors, the team from the MIT Media Lab. And the main objective of this goal is to promote calm briefing while driving to help coping with stress. So for the beginning, let me please give you some more background information. So the main motivation of this work was that stress is a very important factor on the road because it has been shown to impact our driving performance. In particular, both too high and too low stress have been shown to negatively influence our driving behavior and performance. So this is critical for road safety. And if we go beyond the stress during the particular task of driving, but look at it in a more long-term perspective, it has been shown that stress has associations with other diseases such as depression, anxiety, and sleep disorders. So it can negatively impact our overall well-being. The main idea that is underlying our work is that we could use briefing to address the topic of stress. And why briefing? Because it's the only physiological indicator that can be easily controlled voluntarily. So I can intentionally breathe slower if I want to, but slowing down my heart rate is way more difficult, for example. And even if we slow down our breathing intentionally, it has been shown that this can induce calmness and improve other cognitive processes such as concentration, attention, and coordination. And if we look at this, all these factors are important and beneficial for the task of driving. So that's why we raised the question whether acoustic guiding can help to promote slow breathing and thus help to manage stress in a driving task without sacrificing driver attention. The first step was that we designed two different auditory guides that should help to stimulate calm breathing. On the one hand, a more obvious breathing guide that we named Conscious, that is built up based on two harmonic chords, one that should simulate the inhalation and another one that should simulate the exhalation. And this idea is built up on previous work from Paredes, in which they've shown that a coach, a voice coach, so a human breathing guide, can help to slower down breathing rate. And our intention was to reduce distraction from this approach by using harmonic sounds instead of the voice. And this guide is introduced to participants, so they're getting instructions of how to engage with that breathing guide. On the other hand, we developed a more subtle breathing guide, which we named Unconscious. And this guide just simulates white background noise between 30 and 100% of its volume at a level where it's barely perceivable for users. And this approach is based upon previous work from Ghandeharioun and Picard, in which they have shown that the background noise modulation can help to improve calmness in a less demanding office setting. So our goal was to transfer this approach to the more demanding driving task. And this intervention or guide is not introduced to users at all. So what you can see in this graph here is the power spectrum of both interventions, as well as, looking forward to a later study, the power spectrum of a neutral condition, which you can see on the left side here. So in the neutral condition, we can see the power spectrum of constant background noise. So that kind of simulates the car background noise, but doesn't involve any breathing guide. In the middle, you can see the conscious guide, so the two chords. One for them, as written here, intends to simulate the inhalation, and the other one the exhalation. And we can clearly see that it adds volume or power on top of the neutral condition. And finally, on the right side, we can see the unconscious condition that is modulated with a sigmoid shape and just modulates the volume of the background noise. So no additional volume is added. For better understanding, please let me give you an example of each of the briefing guides. Let's start with the conscious version. guide. On the other hand, the unconscious breathing guide. What we did as the next step, based on these two interventions, we designed a closed loop system, of which you can see the architecture over here. The architecture of our system is built up around the driver. So here is the driver. And we use a bioharness sensor from Zepf to measure the user's breathing in real time. And this breathing information is then streamed to our system, in which the data is analyzed and decided whether an intervention should be activated or not. And depending on that situation, we use the Bow speaker to present the personalized briefing guide to users in the simulator that you can see over here whenever needed. How does this work in particular? First, our system requires a calibration. So in the calibration, we measured the user's mean breathing during rest. And based on previous work, we defined that 120% of the mean breathing rate during rest is the desired personalized goal breathing rate or target breathing rate of each participant. And during operation, a step-by-step comparison of the current mean breathing rate and the personalized goal breathing rate is conducted for each user. And whenever the current breathing rate exceeds the goal breathing rate, one of the two breathing guides is activated, and whenever it is lower or equal, it is deactivated. And based on this system, we conducted a user study in which we let users drive in 3 different conditions. So a neutral condition without any interventions, but just the constant background noise for comparison. And one condition where the conscious guide was activated whenever users were breathing too fast, and another one where the unconscious was activated whenever users were breathing too fast. During the study procedure, we collected data on different channels. On the one hand, for sure, physiological signals to later evaluate whether our guide successfully reduced the breathing. And additionally, we measured users' electrodermal activity, EDA. We asked users to provide subjective feedback in the form of rating after each drive, which is indicated here after each driving session. And finally, to get better understanding of the user's thoughts and background information, we asked them to fill out questionnaires for demographics information, personality, and health-related information. And after the whole study procedure, we also conducted an end survey and a qualitative interview to better understand their perspectives. Finally, our simulator allowed to measure telemetry data, so we were also able to analyze the driving behavior. And building up on this procedure, we collected data from 24 participants. Yes, so what did we find looking into the data that we collected? As a first step, we for sure analyzed the breathing rate in each of the conditions to see whether our guides are successful. And what you can see in this graph here are box plots showing the normalized mean breathing rate for each condition over all participants. And what we can visually see clearly is that the mean breathing rate in the conscious condition was lower than in the neutral and the unconscious. And conducting statistical tests, it is supported that the conscious guide significantly reduces the breathing in comparison to the neutral and the unconscious condition, which is a great finding. On the other hand, we can see that the unconscious guide does not reduce the breathing in comparison to the neutral condition. So it seems like the unconscious guide doesn't work. To better understand this, we did an additional analysis step. And luckily, in our qualitative interview after the study, we asked people to report for each condition whether they definitely did not perceive any acoustic feedback at all, or whether they believe to perceive some acoustic feedback in the background. And this allowed us to separate those 2 different groups of participants from each other. And yeah, since the guy was intended to be unconscious, only 6 participants stated that they perceived some kind of feedback, and most of them weren't even able to describe what they perceived. But separating this, we can still see that there is a trend towards calmer briefing for those who believe to perceived audio feedback. So this indicates that the more attentional resources are paid towards an intervention, the better is the effect. And finally, which is aligned with the previous findings, the time for which participants were under their personalized goal briefing rate increased up to 63% for the conscious condition, in comparison to 15 and 12% for unconscious and neutral. Besides evaluating the effect on briefing, we also analyzed the driving behavior of people. And as a main metric, we considered the number of crashes participants committed. And what you can see here in this graph is the normalized mean number of crashes for each condition over all participants. And interestingly, what we can see here is that the results yield the opposite picture of the briefing. So there are more crashes in the conscious condition than in the neutral and unconscious, which is also supported by the statistical tests. This indicates that consciously following a briefing guide demands cognitive load and attention, and thus has a negative impact on the driving safety. To better understand this, we did the same separation for the unconscious condition as before, and we can also see a trend here, this time towards more crashes for those who believe to perceive the acoustic feedback, which again indicates that the more attention is paid towards the intervention, the higher is the risk for accidents or risky driving behavior. To better understand why this effect is happening of increasing accidents for following the briefing guides, we did another analysis considering the user's background information, so their user profile. We did pairwise comparisons between the conscious and the unconscious intervention among different subpopulations, considering people's previous experiences in terms of driving, their personality, and their health-related information. Based on this analysis, we found that driving experience is a very important factor that is highly associated with several of the considered metrics. So first, we found that in the conscious condition, people with less driving experience has a significantly higher of infractions. Further, they reported a lower perceived pleasure and a higher perceived stress, which also indicates that additionally following the guide during driving is a challenging task for them. And finally, we found a higher tonic EDA level for those people in the conscious condition, which supports the finding regarding stress. So this shows that previous experiences in terms of driving are important to consider when designing in-car interventions for the briefing. And additionally, we found that several personality traits were associated with different factors that we analyzed. On the one hand, we found that the number of infractions are associated with the dimension of neuroticism, and also the subjective ratings for pleasure and stress have been affected by several personality traits. So this suggests that the personality of each specific user, or different groups of users at least, could be important to consider when developing such acoustic in-car briefing interventions. To sum up, what do we conclude? First, the conscious guide successfully reduced the briefing of participants. However, it decreased driving performance, especially for inexperienced drivers. The unconscious guide did not yield the expected effect. But what we found based on the qualitative interviews, it was seen as more appropriate for the driving task by participants. We also analyzed the user profile, and we found that it plays an important role since it's associated with both the effects of the intervention in terms of breathing, as well as with the driving behavior and subjective perception. So this would require further investigation to better understand these associations. And finally, we believe that an investigation in the real driving environment is necessary to verify the ecological validity on the one hand, but also to ensure safety for real road applications of such guides. Yes, and finally, what you can see here is the literature that was used and cited throughout this presentation. Thanks a lot for your attention, and feel free to reach out for me in case you have any questions or comments. Thank you.